my girlfriend at the time, uh, who's now my wife, she was like, I remember she's on the computer and she's like, super random. She's like, "Do you think if I played you a song, you could play it back?" And I was thinking about that. I was like, I mean, depending on what it was, like probably if it was something super crazy, no, I'd have to learn it. But she was like, okay, so there's an audition for Blue Man Group for like guitar player for strings, and I was like, my immediate answer was like, no, like I can't do that. It's not, and I was completely opposed to it. And she nagged me.
Were you opposed because you it wasn't interesting to you, or because you didn't think you would have the what it took to?
It was total self-doubt. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't think that I had any of the skill set or the value that a company like that would be looking for. And and that continued all the way through. So she like nagged the shit out of me for like 2 weeks. And eventually under that pressure, I broke down. I was like, okay, I'll write the CV, the resume, I'll send it in. And I did. And they're like, okay, so then there's the open auditions. Um, and I go to these auditions, and there's probably like 30 or 40 of the local Orlando cats, and I know almost all of them. So I'm sitting like in Universal Studios in like the waiting room, the lobby, and I'm like, oh, there's this guy, and there's this guy, and there's that guy. I was like, there's no way. There's no way. I was like, I know all those guys, they're killer. I'm not going to get this. So I was like, but whatever, I'll just have fun. And I go into the audition, and it's like I'd never auditioned for anything in my life. Like I'm a rock guitar player. I can't read music. I, had toured in vans and stuff. Like I just thought it was way, way out of my league. So I'm in this room, and there's a bunch of like weird instruments and like 2 or 3 drum kits, and like it's just super overwhelming. And there's 8 dudes just sitting in like a horseshoe pattern, just looking at you. Like obviously all pros. It's the band, and they're like, okay, so this is how it's going to work. We're going to play you a song, and then you're going to play it back. And I was like, okay, okay. So they play a piece called Drumbone, which is like one of the iconic ones. If you've ever seen like the classic Blue Man photos, it's the 3 guys and they're holding the large PVC instrument where all 3 of them are holding it and playing it. The Blue Men weren't there. It was just the instrumental stuff that the band plays behind it. And they start playing it. It's a drummer, bass player, guitar player. And I'm looking at the guitar player, and it's like, it's dumb simple. It's like, it's 3 power chords, and it's like bum bum da 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 bum bum da da da, like just like that. Like, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay. So I watch, and I'm like, okay, I think I, reasonably have the idea. So I put on the guitar, and like before we're starting, I remember I had like this moment of like, is this a trick? Like, do they want me to like shred some solo over this or something? And like thankfully I decided against that. I was very close. um but they had said just play it back to us exactly like we played it, and I was like, okay. So then we start, and I play, and I fuck up a couple little things, but like for the most part, I played along with them, and like there was just no reaction from them. They were like, okay, great, thank you. And then I walk out, I'm like, well, okay, that's that. So I was like, let me just go home and forget about it. And then a couple hours later, I get a call, and they're like, okay, we want you to come back for the callback audition tomorrow. And I was like, okay, all right. So then I go back the next
So
day,
all
and
he did
there's
was the
maybe,
first time was played some power chords. The first time
that's
he
it.
just went in and
That's
played that
it.
one thing.
I I would come to learn later that it's it's a lot deeper than that.
Mm-hmm.
Like it may just sound like power chords, but like, this reminds me of like this one thing, like sidetrack. When I was in college, I was working at this shitty restaurant. It was called American Cafe. It was basically a Ruby Tuesdays, but it wasn't even good enough to be called that because it had the same menu. And I was serving there, and it was terrible. And I remember waiting on this one dude who was like talking to this older gentleman. He was like, what do you want to do? I was like, oh, I want to play guitar. And he looks at me, and he's like, there's a lot of guitar players. And I was like, yeah, but they don't all play it the same. And he goes, yeah, that's true. And like, that's kind of what was happening in that audition. Is like, it's deceptively simple, but there's so much stuff that you can tell from just literally 45 seconds of playing. You can hear timing, intensity, you can see like the body posture and your stage presence. You can see how you're interacting with two other musicians, your sense of timing. Like there's so many little details. And like I would learn later that like Blue Man is all about that. Like it's all about these really fine particular details that you really, really have have to listen for and pick up on.
That's cool.
So yeah, it's like
That's interesting. Yeah.
deceptively it is.
Yeah.
And I never ever would have like realized any of that stuff. I just, because I didn't think that way.
Yeah. So you call back. So you got called back.
So the call back. So I get the call back, and I go back the next day, and it's like maybe 4, 5, 6 people this time. So it had gotten whittled down. And same thing. I'm just sitting there. I'm like, I'm not going to get this. I don't know why I'm here. Still like totally overcome with like self-doubt, as is like very typical with artists. That like for most artists that I know, that goes hand in hand. It's like you're constantly fighting this self-doubt of what you can and can't do. So I go up in the audition. It's the same thing. It's the same dudes in the room, all the instruments, and they're like, okay, so we're going to do the same thing we did yesterday. We're going to play you something. You're going to play it back, except now it's going to be on the electric zither. And I never had seen this thing. And basically it looks like the inside of a piano. So a zither is like a traditional German folk instrument that has multiple rows of open tunings. Like there's no frets or anything. It's just strings on this slab of wood. So it's basically like you've got open E, open B, C sharp minor, like, 6 rows of chords that you play with a slide on one hand, finger picks on the other. And then there's a harp section with these triplicate strings all in like a diatonic tuning. And it's close to 100 strings on this thing. And then they play me the same song. They play me the same dung, 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 but on this thing. And like, if you can play guitar, like the skill set kind of translates. Like it might be a little clunky, because you haven't played it, but like I got it. Like I could see what you were supposed to do. So we went through a series of those things where they would show me something. I would play it back the best I could. They had another section where I was literally hitting the strings with a slide like this, bump, 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 like in a pattern with delay. They had me do some finger picking, and then they stuck a Chapman stick on me. If you've never seen a Chapman stick, it's like a long, basically looks like just a guitar fretboard, no body. It was invented by this guy with the last name Chapman, I think Emmett Chapman, maybe in the 60s or 70s. You play it all by tapping. But this one, you play just one string and you bow it, like with maybe like this big of a section of a bass string. So you bow it. Very weird. So I went through all that stuff, like was just sweating the whole time.
You never played
nervous. Never. I'd never seen it. I had never seen any of these things. Yeah, had no idea. But
surely they knew that too.
They know that. They know that. Yeah. Nobody's expecting you to come in there and just like shred this thing. What they're looking for is somebody who like is enthusiastic, has raw talent, can follow directions. That's huge. Because as I'm playing, they're like, no, try this. Like, don't push so hard on this part. Like, do this, watch your attack on this. And like, that's what they're looking for. They're like, does this person have the skills? Can we train them? And like, are they cool? Am I going to want to work with this person? Because that's 50% of it. It really is. Like, what does it matter if somebody's the best player in the world if you can't spend 10 minutes with them in a room? Yeah. So we go through those things, and later that day I get a call and they offer me the position. And I was like, I think the first thing I said to the manager when she called me was, shut up. I was like, really? So it's like, okay.